Hi, I'm Etta Spencer. Today, let's go to Berlin, but I'm sure we're going to not just stop in Berlin, but we've got to give some thought to Ukraine and Moscow now, because this is a bad day. But I am going to have a good time anyway, talking with my friend Rainer Brown, who
Hello.
is still the head honcho in the International Peace Bureau, and he's based in Berlin. Good morning. For me, it's already afternoon. It's probably evening for you, isn't it, Rainer?
Yes,
Hi.
it's early evening.
Okay, good to see you. Now, we've already in our preliminary conversation realized that we're talking about some major changes that have just taken place in the nature of the war in Ukraine. And I'm sure that's what we're going to talk about most, because I think, to my mind, this is the most dangerous time we've been in yet. I don't know whether you think so. What do you think? First of all, good morning. And why don't you start off by saying what we are both worried about? What has happened that we need to talk about today?
You know, we are one more step further in the escalation dynamics to the Great War. I think this is the result of the speech of Putin from yesterday morning. And the escalation means we are even deeper in the dynamics of war, and the chances for an alternative are becoming smaller and smaller. You know, for me, it is a fight on one side between the war dynamics, and on the other side, the question is, can we change this to a peace dynamic? And peace dynamic means to come to ceasefire, negotiations, dialogue, and agreements. The day before, we had this interesting speech of the president of Mexico, done by his Day of Independence, when he on one side called an argument against the illegality of the Russian invasion, on the other side said the only way are negotiations, dialogue for overcoming the situation. And he suggested a team of moderators for such suggestion. He named 3 partners: the Pope, the General Secretary of the United Nations, and, interesting, the President of India. They should negotiate with the 2 sides about the process for coming closer together. And that negotiations are not impossible. We can see by some negotiations which were happened, the grain negotiations under the leadership of the Turkish president. I'm definitely not a friend of Erdogan, but he brought the 2 sides together. And we have now the export of grain. We have the agreement of the fertilizers and. Even when there are some problems, it works. Yeah. The same is we have the exchange of prisoners, of war prisoners during the last night. 55 Russians and Ukraine were exchanged. So it is in general possible. But what is missing is the political will for negotiations, definitely on the both war sides, but also on the political sides by many, many NATO countries. They are always putting more oil in the fire. And, you know, my German foreign minister is playing really a horrible bad role in this game. And we don't have the actions of the people as a big mobilization for creating an atmosphere for negotiation and diplomacy. We don't have a public atmosphere for negotiations. And this, I think, is the role of the peace movement and our actions. So we are in a difficult situation for everyone, for the peace movement, because we cannot mobilize enough. For many, many politicians in the South, and maybe the majority of the leaders of the states. I was last night listening to the president of the African Union, the president of Senegal, Sali. He was making a brilliant speech saying, look at our continent. We are suffering. People are dying by hunger. We don't get the grain. We don't get the fertilizers we need. Negotiate. Come together. Stop this war. It was a morally and emotionally great speech. But, the two sides, and I really have to say also many of the NATO countries don't follow these lines. So more actions are needed to break this way to more wars and to change this way to a way for starting with ceasefire and coming to negotiations. This is the only way I can see. The alternative is very easy. The alternative is escalation over escalation. And where the escalation ends, we both know this is one of the two sides is using nuclear, and I have not to describe what's happened then. That's the end for everything.
Yeah. Well, I can hardly think of what to add, or I wouldn't want to even qualify what you said. It sounds absolutely rock solid, but I think we have to look for other options as well, because the odds of getting a ceasefire at this moment, it's such a long shot. Because you say political will, that's exactly what's not here, and it's not anywhere. I don't know anybody who at this moment says, well, I guess, I will accept something less than I was hoping to get. And the only kind of negotiated settlement that would really be a ceasefire and a truce and so on, I think would have to be one where somebody has to swallow an awful big pill that, accept very much less than they've committed themselves to trying to get. So I can't see anybody doing it, gracefully or just saying, well, the alternative is so bad that I guess I better acknowledge that I'm going to lose something, but I'll do it for a good cause. Who's going to say that right now?
They're not so far away. Maybe the only difference is, I think, as someone who has responsibility in the peace movement and in the biggest international peace organization, I and my surroundings, we have to try to look for the smallest possibility for developing something in the positive way. I am absolutely on your side that it is absolutely not easy, and I'm also not convinced that we are short-term successful. But I will mention some problems also the war parties have. The Russians have a lot of internal problems. The young people don't want to go to war. We have the first protest actions last night. We have a lot of young people leaving the countries. The flights are outbooked to the neighbor countries where they can go without visa. Mm-hmm. We have, during the last year or last 7 months, we have about 200,000 young people which were searching for working places in the surrounding countries. And the Russians are more than welcome in these countries because they are highly educated. So we can also see that they have problems with their own people in the country. Second, they have a lot of problems with their army. The army don't want to fight. People are running quite quick away. So there are a lot of problems Putin is facing. And we have the same on the other side. We have 100,000 young Ukrainians which were leaving the country illegally, going to the surrounding countries. Some of them are really in Germany. We have people which are escaping from home and are living in the woods because they don't want to go to the army. Mm-hmm. The wounded soldiers and the losses in the army, above all the Ukrainian army, are tremendously high, much higher than that the president is speaking. He never is speaking the truth. So these are elements together with more pressure on our governments to play a more active role for diplomacy. That could be a way for changing the actual situation. And we have to try to go this way. We have to support the refugees. We have to support everyone who is illegally leaving the country. We have to develop actions in our country for ceasefire and diplomacy activities. We have to stop sending weapons, because weapons make the war longer and creates more victims. That might be a possible way. We have huge differences. No one knows what's happened in the United States after the midterm elections. It's also a factor we don't know. So we have also a lot of unsure perspectives. And maybe this together can create a new situation with a little bit more hope. This is the background we are trying to work. We are in direct contact with Russian oppositions, above all women. We are also in contact with people which are working against the war in Ukraine. We are trying to help them where we can. That's what we can do. And like me, the work of Berta von Suttner. And when Berta von Suttner was working against the wars, she got very often from her aristocrats the question, does it make sense what you are doing? The militaristic approach is too strong. And she always was saying, you can read this in her famous book, The Weapons Down, we have to try it. We have to try to convince the people that war is bad, that war will never help solving the problems. So that is maybe a little bit illusion and a little bit hope, which we have to try to develop some perspectives for the future.
Okay, when you said your vision of how the most hopeful thing, my interpretation of what you were saying was that, and I think it is, that you hope that because the pressures are so serious, there's opposition in Russia and so on, that this would be enough to get them to negotiate some sort of compromise. It would be sufficient somehow to persuade Putin to come to the bargaining table. Now, when I said that I don't think that's very likely, what I'm thinking is that what might be slightly more likely, and I don't know. I mean, I think asking Putin to do anything sensible is extremely improbable. But you've given all the reasons why he has to worry. And indeed, you're right. I've just 10 minutes ago was reading a letter from a dear friend in Russia who I'd asked him to do something, to write something for me. And he obviously can't, because he says, I'm doing everything I can to get out of the country right now before it's too late. And so he's busy trying to just find an escape route. And apparently, as you're saying, that's true for lots and lots of people. There are people marching in the streets. I don't know how big the crowds are, but I did see something. I saw a huge demonstration from the air. So I could see that it covered several square blocks of people, crowded together. But it didn't, the cut line didn't say where this was. I don't know whether it was, oftentimes St. Petersburg has big demonstrations, but I don't know where this was, but there was a huge demonstration someplace in Russia. And I'm talking maybe 10, 20,000 people in a couple of square blocks. But so what would this, I think it is more probable by, a tenth of a degree that they can actually get some resistance to Putin and oust him. That somebody in the regime may say, we will not continue this mobilization because the young people won't go and the mothers won't let them go and things like that. So the notion that you could get some ouster of Putin, I think might be slightly more likely, which is still very unlikely, but slightly more likely than getting him to voluntarily agree to any kind of compromise.
Never forget that we have a common compromise on the table. This is the agreement from Istanbul from the end of March. There was a common paper.
Okay.
From both sides. And it was also accepted by Putin. It was not accepted by the British and US government. They pushed Zelensky to left the table. So I think it is not only one side. You are totally right that it's absolutely not easy to push Putin, and he needs a lot of internal pressure. But he is also clever enough that he wants to survive. And maybe he has to accept changes in his society and change his position. But, we also have to put pressure on the other side. The Ukrainians also believe that they can win the war, but they never can. And the Western countries are supporting these ideas that they can win, that he can win the war. So I think what is also needed is pressure on the NATO governments to go the way of diplomacy and to take one of the suggestions which are existing as a background of negotiations. And let me say 2 or 3. One is definitely the agreement from March, which could be a background for future negotiations. The second, and for me the absolutely best one, is a paper developed by the Vatican under the leadership of Jeffrey Sachs.
I'm sorry, say it again. A paper developed by whom?
The best developed suggestion for a peace process is developed by the Vatican. There was a very highly interesting Vatican peace conference.
Vatican,
yes.
Oh, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, it was in June. It was on the Pope suggested to Jeffrey Sachs to invite 30 highly experts for a discussion about possible ways out of the war. And they were coming out with a very clear plan for negotiations, for ceasefire, for steps, how to solve the Ukrainian problem, the Crimea problem, Donetsk and Lugansk. It is really a great developed plan. The experts were coming from politicians. The main politician leader was Prodi, the former European Union Commissioner, chief of the European Union Commission, and Prime Minister of Italy, and others, and experts coming mostly from more or less conservative foundations, like the Germany Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, with the foundation of the Chancellor's Office of the Foreign Ministry, and others, militaries and an end. And this plan is quite acceptable for both sides. It don't accuse any side. It opens the way for negotiations. Then we have the peace plan from the Italian government, which is near to the peace plan from the Vatican. So there are suggestions which could be the back.
You're closer to it than I am by far, Rainer, because I don't know the details of any of these proposals. Mm-hmm. You say that I don't know whether it's the Vatican plan, but you said that one of these plans would be acceptable to both sides.
Yeah.
Tell me, I can't even imagine at the moment any solution that's going to be really acceptable to both sides.
Yeah, because we don't.
Please tell me what you think could possibly fill the bill for that.
When I would know this, what will fill the gap to come to negotiations, then I would get the Nobel Peace Prize. So I can only say there are suggestions which rely on the suggestions where both sides agree. And what now is needed is to create pressure on all sides, including our own governments, for leaving this way of escalation and for going away of diplomacy and peace negotiations.
But that's like wishing on a star. I mean, I'm sorry, but that it ain't gonna happen. And so, given the fact that I think it's a fact, it's not going to happen. What is there any possibility that might happen? And I don't even. It's really. The only. I think that the problem is I believe Putin when he said, "I will use nuclear weapons." And then I think, well, you do that and they're really in the fire.
In reality, he was saying the same what he was saying always, and which is a part of the Russian military doctrine. When his country is in danger, at the end, he will use nuclear weapons. That is not totally new.
What the difference is now he's going to have this referendum, and now these breakaway Donetsk and Luhansk and maybe some of the other places now that he's captured, Zaporizhia. Maybe some of those areas will now become part of Russia itself. So then anything that even a continuation of the war as it's being fought now would be regarded as an attack on Russia and therefore a legitimate target for nuclear war. I mean, that is the new thing that, like yesterday that happened.
And first of all, we are waiting for these campaigning, and we are waiting what's happening the next time. We are in the beginning of the process. And, the background of my thinking is when you are looking to wars end either by negotiation or by the victim of one side, or the victory of one side.
Or stalemate, and then people get so tired they say, well, let's quit.
Or it's the end of human beings. That can happen. Yeah. But when we are waiting for that, we can do it. When we want to stop this, we have to think how we can do it. And when I'm thinking about that and looking to peace processes, there was the end of the war in Vietnam. Kissinger was negotiating with the foreign minister of North Vietnam. For many, many years, no one could expect that. They were bombing, they were destroying the whole country, they were throwing napalm end. But at the end, they had to come to an agreement. Even after more than 20 years, they have to come to an agreement between the Taliban and the United States. So, because the situation shows that no side can win. And in this war...
I mean, the Taliban won. It's not like they came to an agreement.
No. They won. At the end. Because of another situation, not because of the negotiations. First of all, we had these negotiations which opened the peace process. Yeah, and we have to see that we can develop a peace process, even when it is horrible, difficult. And we have to see if there are, and in this case, I agree with you, which are steps before a real peace process happened. And maybe there are some. The grain negotiations have to start again in October because the old treaty ends in October. So is there an ongoing process? Is there a new agreement? Both sides are sitting together. The same is with the question of the prisoners, the war prisoners. Are there new negotiations, new contacts? Maybe there are even some more negotiation about the exchanges of prisoners, because both sides had a lot of prisoners from the other side. Are there more negotiations how people can survive the winter? The winter in this area is horrible.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Yeah.
And for both troops, are there agreements how to deal with the winter? So the question is, are there initiatives, and I think Gutierrez is thinking in this direction, for developing first steps before we are really coming to negotiations, but which are opening a little bit the door for negotiations? But
even the term negotiations, I guess maybe that's where I'm balking. I think that at this point, there's nobody going to back down. And therefore, to talk about negotiations is just wishful thinking. You could, even if you could get them to the table, nothing would come of it. We need a mechanism that basically gets around the problem that one human being can cause all of this trouble. It was Putin, and it was Putin single-handedly that was able to start this war because he is so much in control that nobody is in a position to stop him. When I ask people in Russia, who can stop Putin? Or I ask people like Michael McFaul, who can stop Putin? People could say nobody. There's nobody in the world right now who can stop Putin. Well,
first of all, I'm open for every other way for discussion which is helping to develop a peace process, every way. And no one can say that he has the answer. All of us are trying to find answers or elements of answers. So when others have better ideas which way we can go, or which way we should go in addition, I'm more than happy to support them and to go the way, because definitely only together we can find ways how we can come out of this situation. But I'm also not a friend to say Putin alone. Putin was in Germany speaking in the German parliament, with open hands and open arms, saying, come to us, develop with us the country. This was in 2001 and 2003. But what were we doing? We were marching to the east. We were never accepting the Russian security interests, never. We are always beaten the Russians. And this has consequences. And now we have the Putin which we have now. This is not the Putin of the 2000 years, even not of the 2007 years. And we have to see how we can come out of this situation. And maybe the only partner or the only country which can help us coming out of the situation is China. Maybe we need China as a diplomatic partner.
No, yeah. I have a friend in Kyiv who's a Russian. And he got to us several months ago saying, how can we ask both India and China to jointly yank on Putin's leash and tell him, don't you dare to use nuclear weapons. That's the one thing that he was worried about even several months ago, that when Putin is cornered, he will use nuclear weapons. And that's what I'm afraid of most. And so you can go back 20 years and talk about what a nice guy he looked like in his earlier period. But right now, this is a man who is the most dangerous person on the planet by far. But, he has total control over the decisions. Now, I think what we need is something like an arrangement where the United Nations says this guy is a war criminal because he's refused the orders from the International Criminal Court to stop the invasion, because they told him right within the first week or so after he invaded, stop it while we consider this.
This will not happen.
Therefore, anybody who's the head of a country who is a war criminal, and he is as of now because he's disobeying the International Criminal Court, they should be deposed immediately and a new government installed. And it's not up to the rest of the world to invade Moscow and get rid of him. It's up to the Russian people, or at least the people in his cabinet or in his entourage, to get rid of him and replace him with somebody who will obey international law. And that if the United Nations says, and all of the the ICJ, the ICC, the General Assembly, you name whatever outfit you want, all of them collectively should say, he is no longer accepted as the head of this government because he's a war criminal. You get rid of him, we'll talk to somebody who is going to obey international law. That could legitimize the actions of these people in Russia who are at least marching in the streets now. We do know that there are plenty of them who resent this overnight turn to real warfare. And there may be people in his entourage who would be scared to death otherwise. But if we legitimate it and say, you need a coup, guys, get your act together and get rid of this guy and replace him, because he's not acceptable to us. We'll not deal with him.
I think, okay, let's see which way will be more successful, my way or your way. And, but please have in mind that Russia is internationally not isolated. And when you are speaking at the United Nations,
Russia is not what?
Not isolated internationally.
Oh, not isolated.
No, and when you speak about the United Nations and war criminals, then many leaders of the world have many other names to say. They will first say Bush.
Oh, yeah.
They will say Blair and many others. And they have not forgotten.
Well, maybe they haven't forgotten. And I agree that,
willingness.
All of these guys should have been prosecuted at the
Okay.
time. The problem is right now, the Vietnam War is over.
But, the other countries.
You can't prosecute the guy who caused the Vietnam War or whatever. Or the Korean War. Let's go back to whatever
yes,
you want.
Can.
You can't prosecute them. But the point is, with the International Criminal Court, you can't bring a guy to The Hague right now. What you have to do is wait 10, 15 years until the war is all over and he's done all the mischief he can do. And maybe then somebody can catch him.
Let me finish my sentence.
Maybe you could put him on trial. But the point is we have to have a system that enables us to stop the guy while he's in the process of carrying out these war crimes.
Okay, let me finish my sentence. My sentence is that many leaders of the world will not do it because they have not forgotten what happened in the other years. Never. And they have not forgotten the colonial times. And look to the United Nations, look to the speeches at the United Nations. The NATO countries and some others are on one side. All the others, the huge majority of the countries, are calling for ceasefire and negotiations and stop the war. Look to all the agreements after the beginning of the war between Russia and India, Russia and Indonesia, Russia and Philippines, Russia and many other Asian countries. Russia has sold more oil and more gas than ever. They were earning more money than ever. They are not. That is the reality of the international power structure. And when the Western countries not try to develop a peace process with others, then they will fail. And what the Western countries, above all the NATO countries, is doing, they are not going the negotiation way. They are putting more oil in the fire. And that is the background that I'm saying we living in these countries have to put pressure on our government to go for the negotiation way. And maybe this opened also the door for really international negotiations. And then maybe we need a common negotiation initiatives from France and China and India. And let's see if this can work. We have not tried it. We don't know what will be the result of this.
All right. Now, I asked you to tell me what the content of the proposal from the Vatican or from even, I don't know the details of what Erdogan had proposed, but okay. So we got some people trying to find some terms, but what you've just said is, let's negotiate. All right, let's negotiate, but I want to know on what terms we are going to be agreeing at the end of these negotiations. I mean, what do you think the U.S. would conceivably accept? Turning over a third of Ukraine and just letting Russia win? That's the condition under which we could actually get Russia to consent to a ceasefire. But the U.S. and the EU and Ukraine and practically everybody else in the world would say that would be a disgraceful betrayal of the people who have been trying to defend their country against aggression.
Let's take the Istanbul agreement between Ukraine and Russia at the end of March. It said, and it is in similar words, but some additional points, the same in the plan of the Italian government and also in the Vatican plan. It says ceasefire, negotiations, regional autonomy for Donbass and Lugansk in the Ukraine Federation with a new constitution of Ukraine, with acceptance, the autonomy, including freedom of speech, including the language for these regions, reduction and going back of all troops home, a new neutrality of Ukraine, relations, economic relations of Ukraine to both sides, East and West, and discussing about Crimea again in 5 years, and so long acceptance of the situation how it is. This is not in my, my words.
I think both of us would love it, but who's going to accept that?
Yeah, it was accepted by both sides by the negotiations at the end of March.
What happened?
There was a no, and this comes from two capitals. One was Washington, and the second was London. They don't want to have this agreement.
All right. Now, if that's so, I don't disagree with you. I'm shocked. Okay, prove to me that that's really the whole thing. My God, that's quite a statement, because actually, the terms that you've just given would be fine. I think, it really could be a very good outcome. I think everybody should be satisfied with those terms, but the U.S. and Britain alone refused to allow that to be considered.
Friendly speaking, Zelensky is not making any decision alone. The decision makers of Zelensky is the CIA of the United States. His military attacks are organized and developed by the United States. He is
certainly his military system is. The U.S. claims that they're letting him make decisions and that they're not interfering with his policies. I don't know, but if you can prove or definitely show that the U.S. kept Zelensky from making such an agreement, that would be really quite shocking.
It is not my words.
And look, I mean, I think the whole problem was, why didn't he accept the Minsk agreements? This wouldn't have happened if he'd accepted the Minsk agreements. So and what you proposed isn't that much different from the original Minsk agreements.
But who was not accepting the Minsk agreements? It was mainly the Ukraine, who was never following the Minsk agreement because they don't want to do it. Yeah. So, and
well, was it, I mean, if you're saying that it was Washington that kept him from accepting the Minsk agreements,
Washington never accepts the Minsk agreement.
Sorry?
The Minsk agreement, Washington or the United States politics never accept the Minsk agreement. They were never a part of the Minsk process. They were always in opposition to the Minsk process.
Yeah, but I think he could have done it anyway. I don't think I have not heard anybody else say that the U.S. somehow would have made it impossible for him to accept it. I think he could have accepted the Minsk agreements, or when I say he, I don't know, but let's say Ukraine could have accepted the Minsk agreements earlier on.
He's definitely not right, because in any case are two persons, Poroshenko and Zelensky, because the main agreements were discussed with Poroshenko and not with Zelensky. So he is definitely wrong. So, but, the only point I want to say is that we have to try to create an atmosphere where negotiations are possible. And this is what I learned from the speech from Guterres from the opening of the United Nations General Assembly. He was intensively calling for these kind of negotiations. And he was intensively open for looking for moderators who could bring these countries together at one table or at two tables. I know that it is even more difficult since last night, but personally, I see no alternative for going this way when someone is suggesting me an alternative or a second way or even a third way, I'm more than happy to say, let's try it. But up to now, I cannot see any other way. So that is the background. We are trying to go a little bit this way. And, you asked me before we start discussing about IPB. IPB will come out with an own IPB peace plan for Ukraine at the council meeting in Ghent at the mid of October. We are working on that. We are trying to put several ideas which are flying in the air or which were put on the paper in several plans together to a peace plan of IPB, where we want a little bit to interfere and support these discussions, knowing that it is a very difficult process, knowing that it could fail, and maybe even knowing that the percentage that it fails are higher than it is accepted. But what is the alternative? The alternative is to wait that the military escalation is continuing step by step. And that could not be the role of the peace movement. So we have to think and to try to find alternative ways.
Well, I'm not opposed to trying to find alternative ways, obviously. But I think when you talk about negotiate, when you just urge people to negotiate, that's really basically saying, oh, okay, guys, I see you in the middle of a fight. Why don't you just put down your weapons and shake hands? I mean, unless you can at the moment say what these negotiations would look like, what the terms that are available that they should be considering before they go to the table, then asking them to go to the table is just like, dreaming.
Let's not forget
let's all stop fighting and play nicely together. Yeah, that's lovely, but that's that's not.
Let us not forget that both sides have problems with these fights, and the war is for both sides not without problems. It creates for both sides many problems, and the question is, are becoming these problems so high, and the difficulties which they have with the continuation of the war, including the winter, that brings them to the position, okay, it is also quite good or better for us to sit at the table.
I'm not against sitting at the table, but, it's like, have you ever been in charge of two dogs? You take your dog for a walk and he gets in a fight with another dog and you're trying to get them separated. It's sort of like, it's like telling your dog, heel, while he's in the middle of a fight. You can't expect that. Not unless you can, you got to have some kind of leverage stronger than just saying, now let's all play nicely together and apologize and shake hands.
I don't rate that they're playing nicely. They are doing it by their own interests. And the question is, could their own interests of stopping the war, or the minimum of having a break in the war, higher than the continuation of the war? And
what kind of leverage would you have to put on Putin to make it more advantageous to him to stop the war now? Because he's now taken this step where he said that he'll use nuclear weapons. And he's taken this step where he's holding a referendum to incorporate these countries into Russia, so that even continuing the war that the way it was being fought a week ago, would be an attack on Russia, and therefore, to his mind, a legitimate reason for using nuclear weapons. Now, this is a totally different ballgame. And what can you say now that's going to change the calculus for him? Well, I don't know, unless there's such an uprising in Russia by people who say we will not continue this anymore. I don't think it's very likely, because 80% of the people say they are in favor of the war. So that's not very likely, but it's a lot more likely than just saying, now let's all play nicely together and go to the peace table.
What can bring Putin to a more realistic politics? It's on one side, the internal situation. It's on the second side, the economic situation. On the third point, it is when the West is offering some suggestions which take into account the security interests of Russia, neutrality of Ukraine, no further NATO expansion, let's see how he will react to such suggestions. And in the minimum, we should try to prove it, but we haven't done it. And that is my suggestion, to try.
If you could get them right now, I mean, I don't know how they would get this, but the terms that you mentioned a while ago that you said had been accepted in March, those are very promising and attractive conditions, which I would think ought to have some purchase now. Even on both sides, why isn't that going to work? If you say the U.S. won't allow it, I mean, I don't think the U.S. and Britain really could stop that, and I've never heard them say they would want to. That's a terrible thing.
Who is the winner of this war?
Mm-hmm.
Who is the winner? Who becomes stronger by this war? Not Europe, because Europe is now totally dependent from the US. And and this is again a factor which maybe creates some hope for negotiations. We have not discussed about the social tsunami, which are the consequences of the war for the European countries and for the world. We have not discussed this. In Germany, we start with protest actions, and they will enlarge in a kind we never had in the history of Germany, because people cannot pay their bill. And this is not 1 million, this is not any longer 10 millions, this will be till to 60% of the population. Because they cannot pay the gas prices, they cannot pay the food prices, everything becomes so expensive that we have really a situation we never had in history in our country. And this is, can I say, to Dutch and to all the surrounding countries, to everyone.
Mm.
So, and this also creates internally a new situation. And we will see how our government will work with this. And the interesting point, we have these protests coming. One of the main organizers of protest actions now in Germany are the handymen, the small companies, because they have to give up. The baker cannot survive any longer. I was speaking on the rally 2 weeks ago. There was a boss or owner. He has 2 bakeries in a small city in East Germany. He was saying, I survived the GDR. I survived Corona. Now I have to close the 2 bakeries. I cannot pay any longer the prices. And this is not only one activity or one action. We have thousands of these equal situations. And we have not discussed about that, but this also creates a new situation.
Yeah. Well, what we've been talking about is really all entirely realpolitik. We haven't been talking about what would be a good solution, what would be a just solution, what would be an institutional change that would be for the better in terms of how international decisions are made. Because, Putin has turned over the chessboard. We're not talking about the world order that we had a year ago. We're talking about who knows what kinds of rules. Well, there are no rules anymore. You can't count on anything. The rule that you don't invade another country has been violated. So we've got to think in terms of the long term, as well as how to get that baker to keep his bakeries going. Both levels have to be addressed. And we have to think really in terms of what kinds of institutional changes can be made such that the rest of the world can say to a country, your leader has gone crazy and you stupid jerks are following him. Now stop it. You must change him. You must get rid of him. You must put somebody in charge who's going to obey international law. And to me, that would be a very important goal of the whole operation. If we don't come out of this thing with the world system working better than it is now, or than it has been. I mean, it hasn't been working for 15, 20 years. I don't know when you can say it fell off the cliff, that it wasn't doing too well. But now it's really gone. So we have to put the whole thing back together again. And what we're doing now in terms of calling for negotiations should fit in with this larger plan.
Absolutely agreed. We need a new world order. We need a new security order. We are starting quite in the beginning. It is a little bit like the Cuban crisis, where also both sides are starting with first negotiation to develop something, and then they need 30 years before they are coming to the Helsinki process and an end. And maybe we need quite the same. Maybe it's quicker because the world is changing so rapidly, and the power structures of the world are also changing so rapidly. And never forget that we should not only discuss about Ukraine. We have this huge crisis in South China Sea around Taiwan, which is in the same way difficult, urgent, and dangerous. And, and we can add, we have, what is the new pool? We have 36 wars in the world. So there's a lot of things to do, but I absolutely agree. What we are thinking about Ukraine is to avoid the worst scenario. Mm. And maybe the first step in this winter will be that we have a frozen conflict. And then with the frozen conflict, see if we can develop first steps. Maybe this is a situation which will come when I'm looking to what does this mean winter in this area, and what does this mean, how many victims on both sides, and how the people are suffering, and then we will see what will take part at home in our countries.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
it's hard. It's hard to talk that way. A frozen conflict is not something that you regard as an attractive thing. But compared to the other options, it sounds pretty good right now. Let's go back to the way things were 2 months ago, where it looked like they were at a stalemate. Okay, I don't know, but I hope that among the other things that IPB does when you have this meeting in October, that there should be an effort to actually talk about the kinds of institutional changes that need to be made in the world, and not just the immediate how to prevent the absolutely worst catastrophe that could happen, but we have to look at the how to put the system together in a way that works. I've been thinking and writing about it, but I don't quite know what to do with it. I think, I've been just even this morning taking notes on a book on global governance that tried to look at it by, let's see if I can remember the names of these people. It's a really excellent book, Global Governance, by let's see if I can find the Global Governance and the Emergence of Global Institutions for the 21st Century by Augusto Lopez Claros, Arthur L. Dahl, and Maya Groff. Have you heard of that book?
No, but I write it down.
I can send you the reference to it, or I'll put it at the end of this video so other people can see it too, because I recommend it as a very thoughtful book about, it must have been a couple of years ago that it was published. I don't remember the date, but they were looking forward to an opportunity to really give new thought to restructuring the UN and so on. It's mostly about the UN.
To say some word to that, to IPB, we were coming out in April with the Common Security Report number 2, our shared future, together with the International Trade Unions Confederation, the Olof Palme Center in Stockholm. I think this is our part for this future discussion about new world order, new world system, democratization of the world system, of the UN, regional security systems, disarmament, nuclear weapon-free zones, nuclear weapon-free states. And so we are a part of this discussion, and we are very happy, and definitely we will continue with this work after the IPB Council. Yeah, it will be a part of the key work of IPB.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know of a few other people who are actually working on what we laughingly call a new world order. One is Alexander Lihotal, and also I talked last week to Michael McFall at Stanford, and it came up in our toward the end of our conversation. So he said, "Oh yes, let's." He said something like, "Yes, let's have another conversation about that," because they have people at Stanford that are giving a lot of thought to kind of restructuring the international order and what needs to be done to make it workable. So I would, I think what I'll try to do is organize several talk shows with people who have particular ideas about it. And I'll include you and any other people. You said the Olof Palme. I think I looked at the Olof Palme thing. It's not. Is this a new thing, or I believe I saw something that's not brand new?
No, this is not brand new. I can only suggest to you to invite the General Secretary of the Olof Palme Center. This is Anna Sundström. She's really good. She's very helpful, and she was an important part of the developing these document. And we have Chinese expert, Russian expert working with us. So it was a really international group. Please have a look at the IPB website or the Olof Palme Center website. There are the documents with all the commissioners, the supporters. I think it is a quite good paper for future discussions.
Okay, I will have a look at it. I'm trying to find other people who are doing that kind of thing. So it's hard to be taking the long view at the moment when you think, we've got the sword of Damocles about to fall on us. And, this particular threat of nuclear weapons yesterday, and coupled with this referendum, I think the whole dynamic has changed almost overnight because I can't brush that off. It seems to me urgent and terribly grave and very, very threatening. So thinking about longer term issues is kind of hard at the moment, but we have to. I think that everything we do has to be consistent with a search for a real long-term solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Remember when was the United Nations discussions was in the middle of the Second World War. So I think it is absolutely needed in these crises also discuss about a more visionary future, not to forget the actual situation, absolutely not, but to have also not to forget that we have also visions for a better and more peaceful world, and never forget this. Yes, I absolutely agree with that.
Good. Okay. Well, it's good thing we found something we can agree to, Rainer. It's always best for peace activists to be on the same team. And I think
when we have no controversial discussion in these difficult situation, I would not know when we should have controversial discussions. I think it is obviously that we have to exchange opinions and look for the best way. This is absolutely needed, and I'm very happy to discuss it. And
Okay, it's been a good conversation. Thank you, and carry on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Project Save the World produces 2 of these shows each week. This is episode number 504. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. People share information there about 6 global issues. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can subscribe for $20 Canadian per year. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see buttons to click to subscribe.